Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session on the panel discussion on innovative capacity building programs for women entrepreneurs. We will be beginning in 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Hello again, everyone. And as always, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for making the time to join us today. We have a cracker of a panel who's going to be discussing a range of things around capacity building for women-led enterprises / businesses. So without further ado, let me hand this over to Janan, who's going to be the Sutradhar, the moderator for today's session, to take things forward. Janan, over to you.
Thank you, Sucharita, and hello and welcome. And I absolutely echo Sucharita's sentiments when she says that it's a cracker of a session. I think all of us have been very excited in the run-up to this because each of us on the panel here have had our own experiences working with women-led businesses. And I think, well, at least for me, it's the first time that I'm sitting across a table, a virtual table, with people from all across the region to exchange ideas and learn from one another, and of course, see what we can do next. So I think we'll kick off with introductions so that you all can get to know the panelists a little better. We're going to try and have a couple of interactive polls through the session to keep you engaged and to also hear from you and be as responsive to your questions as possible. So let's start with introductions, maybe alphabetically. Aditi, will you kick us off, please?
I was always roll number one in school, college, everything. So I was prepared for this. Hi, everyone. My name is Aditi Seshadri. I am a business transformation advisor with Stanford Seed. What that means is that I work with companies. So Stanford Seed is a program that's evolved out of Stanford University. We work in emerging markets, including South Asia, helping businesses at a certain level, what we call SMEs in this region, helping them scale and grow. So I work very closely with a range of companies in that space, to help them kind of figure out how to grow the business through an educational program. We deliver a lot of critical content, frameworks, knowledge, faculty sessions, all of those things. My experience in the startup ecosystem has been for about a decade now. It's been a very fulfilling, very involved phase of my career. And a good part of that I've actually spent working a lot with women entrepreneurs, mentoring women entrepreneurs, and also working with women entrepreneurs through Stanford and through my own brand and my company. So thank you so much for having me here today. Very, very happy to be part of this very stellar panel. Thank you.
Brinda?
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm Brinda Salvadore. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hatch. And Hatch is a co-working and accelerator space here in Colombo. And really, we provide startups with almost like a 360-degree knowledge sharing networks and access really to mentors and so on to really learn, grow, and accelerate their growth so that they don't need to make all the same mistakes that we have. And really one of our core pillars has always been to support female entrepreneurs. It's an area that I'm particularly passionate about because I've really been able to see with my experience that, you know, when women succeed, it has a ripple effect to their communities and as a nation as a whole as well. And the way we support women is really through our incubator and accelerator program, which has now been running for the last 2 years. Yeah, really great and excited to learn from everyone else in the panel.
Minhas, why don't you go next? I'll go last.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jinan and everybody on this call. This is a beautiful sunny afternoon in Dhaka, and I'm having some sun, coming into the way. But I think, looking back for all the time that we have been building the startup ecosystem in Bangladesh for the last 13 years as founder and chief storyteller at Better Stories, and then subsequently the founding director of the Angels, we have come a long way. And I'm really looking forward to learn from all of you, as well as from the audience, perhaps through their questions. So I would like to give it back to you.
Thanks, Minhas. Omar?
Hi, everyone. It is absolutely not a sunny day here in Karachi. We are experiencing what we hope is the tail end of the monsoons because, when it rains in Karachi, it's not fun for anyone, I'm really excited to be here. I think this initiative by Andy India is going to prove to be very valuable in the long term because we really we haven't collaborated as a region on this burgeoning part of our economy, which is the small and medium-sized enterprises, as we call them in our region. I am the project director of the National Incubation Center here in Karachi. We have incubated over 200 startups over the last 4 years, and what we've seen and what I'd love to talk about later on as well is that when we started out, less than 2% of the applications that we used to receive for our incubation center were from women-led businesses or from female founders, and that number has grown to 30% as of today. And so this is how we support female founders or women-led businesses. In addition, I run a company called Pak Tech Hub, which is Pakistan's first venture studio, where we work with startups to actually make them successful. So I'm looking forward to a really interesting discussion, and thank you all for being here and for being part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you all. And my name is Janan, and I work with Willgrow. My career has been largely in the development sector. I started off working with nonprofit organizations and also with CSR in India, focusing on capacity building of small to medium-sized NGOs. And I've been with Willgrow for 5 years now. It's been an incredible journey with the organization. I think, Willgrow being one of India's first social enterprise incubators back in 2001, to a time now where India has over 800 incubators, and to really see the evolution of, not just the types of social enterprises and how they're looking at solving these big problems, but also the kind of support systems that are developing around them. That's really been very interesting to see, at least in the last 5 years that I've been witness to it. When it comes to gender inclusion and women-led businesses, Wilgrow, for many years, not by design, tended to work with at least 30%, in our portfolio being women-led. But when we realized that it's not by design, we also realized that number could very well drop, right? So about 4 years ago is when we started to become much more intentional about working with women-led businesses and also how we work with them. The focus with Wilgrow is strongly on market access and helping women-led enterprises really get a foot in the door with big customers who they otherwise wouldn't be able to. So that's enough about me. We will dive right into the discussion. Before we kick off, Saipriya, could I request you to run the first poll? We'd love to hear from our audience on what you think is the biggest capacity building need for women-led businesses in the South Asian region. We'd love to hear from you, see what you think. Feel free to go beyond the options and add an answer of your own in the other slot. Panelists, you too, please respond to this. We will keep this open for about half a minute and close and then get on with the discussion.
I don't think panelists can vote on
Oh,
this.
that's a shame.
But I'm sure we'll make our views known very shortly.
Okay, shall we wait 30 seconds more and we will then dive in. Everybody, please respond to the poll as soon as you can.
Yes, let's wait a bit, Janan. I see people chewing over the questions and
Mulling over
responding.
it.
We're at 75%. Come on, folks. All right, Saipriya, I think we're good to share.
Okay, so Saipriya is going to share that with us and we're going to weave in those responses through the conversation. So what we're going to kick off with is an overview of, in each of the countries that each of you represent, what is your view on the participation of women-led businesses in your country? Have you been witnessing any particular trends? Has there been growth? What are the reasons behind that? If you could shed some light on that, I think that set a great context for the audience. Omar, I'd like to start with you. As you mentioned earlier, that it used to be just 2% women-led businesses, and you've seen growth there, right? So can you shed some light with us on why do you think that happened? What has influenced this increase, really?
Sure. So this was not an accident. I think that if we had not taken some very purposeful decisions, let's say about four years ago, this number would probably still be going at, in the low 2 to 5% range. One of the first things we started doing was we started focusing on and messaging towards women founders or people who we believed had the potential to become founders. So there's, messaging plays a key role, because when you see positive, affirming messages, it sort of gives you permission to move outside your comfort zone. It tells you that society is open for these kinds of thought processes to actually turn into action. When we induct a new cohort, we focus a great deal on the applications from female founders that we have. And so there's a little bit of positive discrimination, if you will, where we actually encourage female founders. We help them through the incubation process so that, there's no confusion. There's many female founders don't know how to make a pitch deck. So we will actually help them to make a pitch deck in many cases. So, across the region, there's this concept of aunties, right? So we all know aunties who are running small businesses, who are, they're doing chef businesses. They're cooking from home. They're doing what are traditional dhandas. They're not really startups, So what we've been messaging and what we've been trying to talk to these people about is figure out a way to incorporate technology into your startup so that it becomes scalable, so that it becomes bigger than perhaps even you have imagined. So the end result of that is that up to now, we have about 70 women-led or co-founded startups at NIC Karachi. We focus on training the founders. We focus on really upskilling them, building their capacity so that the first time they pitch, and 6 months later it's a completely different person who's actually standing up there and pitching their business. Along with that, because we are part of a government-sponsored project, we work with the government to try to increase or improve the kind of policies that are being made to encourage women to participate. There are many issues, particularly in the banking sector, where if a woman wants to go and start her own business or wants to open her own bank account, she faces cultural, I don't know what to really call them, but cultural norms where people at the bank will ask her, and this is the case that happened just last week. One of our founders came to us and said, the bank manager asked me if I had had a fight with my dad, which is why I didn't want to bring him along to co-sign my banking documents. So those cultural stereotypes, those norms are something that we have been addressing through regulation, through working with various ministries. We're trying to normalize women in business. So there's a lot more to unpack there, but maybe as we go along, we can do that.
Okay. Thanks, Omar. So what I hear you say is that when it comes to the ecosystem in Pakistan, representation of women leading businesses wasn't very good, but the kind of work that you've been doing is not only talking directly to women entrepreneurs and saying, there are opportunities out there. Now, I'm speaking to you directly. This is how you can work with different organizations. This is the kind of support that you can get. That's one big tactic. And I really like the word that you use, which is purposeful decisions that you took. And the other aspect is actually working with government closely and seeing how the ecosystem can be made more, enabling for women-led businesses. So that's really good to hear. Thank you for that. Minhaz, moving over to you. In Bangladesh, typically, when we were talking earlier, we were talking about how in Bangladesh, the participation of women in the economy has always been, for a while, it has been quite palpable, right? How does that translate to women-led businesses? And how have you seen the ecosystem change or participation increase over the last few years?
Right. Thank you, Janan. I think I will perhaps cite a 2018 study by IFC. At that time, it was unfortunately a meager 7.5% of women who were running a business. And then I would like to cite another data point in 2021. Of all the people who were starting a business on Facebook, 60% of them are women. So although, you can argue that on Facebook, the size of the businesses are pretty small in general. But you see, when you lower a barrier, particularly in this case, the technology, Facebook, I'm not advertising for them, but opening a business on Facebook, perhaps everybody in this room would agree, is one of the biggest thing that has happened in our lifetime so far. And then that enabled a whole range of women entrepreneurs to come into business. And that's, for me, the biggest headline. So if you lower the barrier for entry into business, then you are effectively allowing that whole, segment of population who were just waiting out there to get perhaps the little spark that they needed, right? And then, yesterday we were listening to Rubana, who came to open this convening with the fireside chat. Look at her. She is such an accomplished woman, and she is the first in 4 decades, the first president of the Governments Association, right? So even though the number may be low, but given a little bit of perhaps environment and opportunities, they can rise to the top. And I think that's a story. So in my humble experience, as I worked with few women entrepreneurs across the country, what I have seen, yes, there are enormous challenges socially, financially, and the issues are, I think, common across South Asia. I wouldn't be surprised if, we all talk about the same set of challenges, let's say the trust by, let's say, banks to give them money, the trust by the customers to buy products from them, of course, the very fact that, the families oftentimes would not like the idea, and the kind of perhaps license that we give to men in our societies across South Asia for failing. I mean, although in general, failure is not perhaps the most acceptable idea as yet, but still, perhaps a man founder may be able to try twice, thrice, 4th time, 5th time, but maybe for a woman founder, it's kind of make or break. They have to make it happen. So I do know of women founders who have got, issues to do with how their family members treat their, failure, their lack of success. So overall, I think, it's one of creating role models, one of creating, perhaps opportunities where the barriers can be lowered. And then, of course, I think the idea of intentionality, which I think we will be delving deeper, and I will certainly want to bring more experience into that conversation. So back to you.
Thank you, Minaz. Yeah, I can't wait to get more into the intentionality piece. But absolutely, I fully agree with you when it comes to lowering barriers. And I think Bangladesh has been, maybe culturally, because women were participating in the economy quite traditionally as well. Maybe that was something that has sort of helped the ecosystem. Brinda, coming to you, in Sri Lanka, what are you seeing in terms of participation of women? What kind of growth? Has it been slow? Has it been rapid? What are some factors owing to that?
Yeah, thank you for that, Janan. I think Sri Lanka as a whole actually is still at a very nascent stage. I think we have now around 700 startups that are registered. And of that, I'd say only about 10 to 12% are actually female owned or part-owned businesses that are registered. And just sharing my experience, I think I echo a lot of what Omar and Minaz was also sharing, but coming back, I guess, to a program that we kicked off. It was called Kick-Ass Bootcamp for Female Entrepreneurs. And the reason why we actually launched it was two years ago. So just as we went into lockdown, COVID, we got a lot of questions coming in asking from female entrepreneurs or females who wanted to start businesses, because all of a sudden they had to kind of become breadwinners of the family, and they were really struggling to find their place, and they were just looking for advice. And so we launched Kick-Ass, and with the pool that we had of the women that were asking us, we started with just 10 women, and we obviously had dropouts as well. But given the achievements or the growth that they were actually able to create in a really short space of time, our program was actually just 1 month. And the success stories that we were able to share as a result, second time we launched the program, we had 50 applications. And now we're sort of at our 5th series now, and we have over 250 women applying for this program. So I think there's something to be said about, while it is absolutely important to see women in really high-ranking positions in corporations and policy making, there's also something to be said about seeing another woman that's perhaps in a very similar circumstance to you be able to grow a successful business. And because it almost becomes accessible then, right? Okay, if she can do it and she's, not so dissimilar to me, I can absolutely do it. And I think what we were quite intentional about doing as well is while our alumni graduated, we brought them back into the program in a way to get them to kind of speak. There was peer learning as well amongst all the different alumni networks. And I think getting all the women in the program to understand that this is a problem that we're trying to solve, and we're all equally responsible to promote more women in the workplace we really worked in our favor. And I think through that channel, we were able to reach a lot more women to join the programs as well.
Wow, that's really very inspiring, Brinda, because it sounds like it was really you've leveraged collective strength to be able to increase the participation of women-led businesses, which is a fantastic story and really inspiring, I think, for other countries to learn from. Aditi, coming to you, I mean, you've been in the ecosystem, as you said, for 10 years. You've been part of the evolution. You've seen, how this has grown. You also have an overview of the entire region through your work with Stanford Seed, right? So can you help us contrast your experience in India when it comes to the participation of women-led businesses and the capacity building needs for them? Can you help us contrast it from what you've heard from the other panelists?
Sure. So I think one of the things that's happened in India in the last few years is that, I was looking at some data. The entrepreneur story, like, it's become really sexy, right? So even as kids come out of schools and colleges and everything, versus getting into jobs, people want to become entrepreneurs, which I think all of these are important things because that means your funnel is that much bigger. And India was as of now, I think India has something like 100 unicorns, 4 of which are actually women, which is quite something as a signaling effect, right? And then there's, of course, Falguni Nayyar's IPO. Falguni became an entrepreneur in her 50s. So these are all, I think, very strong, really signaling, there's a very strong signaling effect to this because you look at these women, like, okay, this is the big growth story is possible. However, the pandemic definitely played a factor. The number of startups started by women has actually dropped in the last 2 years. And I think we can definitely say that is because of the pandemic, because of, everything that happened. A lot of businesses shut. So I see that, there's 2 things. One is that we know that the Indian ecosystem is pretty mature. All the stakeholders are there. There's a lot of capacity building. The funding landscape is really, it's really growing. It's really mature. So the pathway is there. What is not there is the numbers, because the numbers are not enough people are coming into the funnel. And for me, really, the biggest gap is from the early stage going into the later stage. So I think that connects back to, I think a pathway is important. And I think, I think Minaz mentioned that, which is that making it as easy as possible for entrepreneurs, women, to start businesses, yes. What we are seeing is that a lot of them are starting businesses, but they're not able to sort of go past that startup phase because running a business for anybody is hard, but startup plus home, plus kids, plus bias, plus, lack of access to finance and all of those kind of things. So obviously they're not able to sort of go past that initial stage. And we're actually seeing this in our programs as well. So we have a virtual accelerator program for startups. In fact, we work with Bangladesh Angels Network and a couple of other people who are part of this convening as well. So we get a lot of startups in there, and about 25 to 30% are women-led businesses, which is okay, which is not a bad number. This is virtual. This is a 4-month program. It's a business accelerator. So it's, it's your classic sort of business accelerator kind of thing. We also have our flagship program, which is a 1-year, very intensive program for people anywhere above 2-3 crore turnover to revenue to 60-70 crore turnover. Over there, we're not hitting our numbers at all. We set a target every year of 25% women-led businesses. We're not hitting those numbers. This year, we had only 6 women join that program compared with 44 men. Because these are much larger businesses. A lot of them are legacy businesses, funded startups, all of those kind of things. So we're literally seeing this in our work itself. There are a lot of people are coming into the funnel. So for me, really, the biggest thing is I think that gap, which I think some of us are, it sounds like a lot of us are there at the early stage. And I know at Stanford, we're at the later stage, but there's something that's not happening in between, which is really what, I feel like a lot of the challenges are over. There's something very systemic, of course, is going on there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's exactly what, all the panelists were talking about. We've seen a growing number of women leading businesses now. That is certainly happening due to intentional efforts on the parts of organizations like the ones on the panel before, due to a government policy being influenced, due to various cultural factors also possibly changing. There are certainly a number of women entering business and leading businesses. And even in the poll that we ran earlier, the number of people who said that we think that women-led businesses require capacity building when it comes to setting up an incubator, that was just 8%. But a majority of people feel that when it comes to capacity building, women need support in growth, expansion, scale. They require support when it comes to building an external presence, when it comes to marketing, pitching, and really taking their business to the next level. So I think this is a great overview of the South Asian region where we see a lot of similarities. And there are certainly learnings when it comes to how can we be more intentional in building capacities to take women to that next level. And that's what I want to get into next. So, if we could get into the meaty part of the discussion, right, which is in each of your countries, what are you seeing when it comes to demand, right? So are you looking at a particular is there a particular demographic of women-led businesses that you see really looking out for capacity building, or is it from a particular industry, or are they looking for a particular kind of skill sets or subject matter that they want to learn on, right? So what is the demand that you're seeing, and how have you used that or interpreted it to be more intentional about your programs, about your design? What have you seen has worked in response to that demand, right? Where have you seen high impact, very, very good outcomes when it comes to your response to the demand? If we can answer that both from a demand and how you addressed it, that perspective together, I think that would be super useful for the audience. Aditi, why don't we start with you? Since you just shared a little bit about the 2 different programs that you run and the contrast in terms of demand, maybe taking forward a little bit from there and getting a little more nuanced about how design elements have made a difference.
Sure. So let me talk about the early stage accelerator first. So at that stage, so a lot of these startups actually come. We work with collaborators, so they're also already sort of empaneled with another incubator, or so that means they're already there's some support that they're already getting, some validation. Let me put it that way. They've already got some validation of what the idea is and what the startup is. So they come in at this stage. Their challenges are more around, on the business side, I think more around customer acquisition, product market fit. Then this is across men and women. Customer acquisition, product market fit. How do you kind of understand the value proposition? All of those kind of things. Also, early stage businesses typically are looking for a lot of mentoring support, because it's that thing of hearing from someone else who's done it before, or just having someone who's invested or interested in the business, but not an employee. All of those kind of things. So those are your classic, what the kind of support that all of us, I think, provide to the entrepreneurs. The women, what we've definitely seen is community really matters. Women do tend to work better in, peer sharing, community activities, the opportunity to interact with each other. And I think what Brinda mentioned, right, which is that to see other people like you and to feel like you're not alone, I think that's definitely quite important for women, because they're also kind of getting past, it's those things, right? It's like, I have to actually leave behind a lot of this baggage and my family and all of these kind of things. So this has to be really worth it. There is that extra element. So community definitely helps. Seeing a lot of people like you who are doing this, having other women as mentors, not a requisite, But I think again, it just helps with that factor of seeing someone a bit more experienced who has gone through something similar and who can open some doors for you. I think men have always just been better at, getting doors to open. I think, women do it in a different way. Let me put it this way. I don't think better or worse. Women just do it in a different way. We are, it's more sort of community oriented. So I think that's something that really works. In terms of the design itself, I think virtual has helped hugely with participation in a lot of our capacity building because of two reasons. One is that, of course, it's the reach, right? We've been able to reach people in smaller towns. We've been able to reach places in not as sort of developed ecosystems like the Northeast. We're able to reach people over there because of virtual. And the other big part is I think virtual allows for asynchronous learning. So you miss something, you can go back, you can watch a recording, because we've had those challenges. We've tried like different timings. First, we were like, okay, we're like, okay, let's do sessions in the morning. But people are like, they're busy with work in the morning. So we're like, okay, let's do sessions in the evening. But evening is a lot of family and household duties. But, the fact that people can actually do asynchronous learning later on actually really helps. But what I've seen is once you go past that, like with the more mature companies, their challenges actually kind of even out. At that stage, it's really just challenges of scale, how to grow the business, how to manage your teams. I think once the women kind of get their businesses past that, they've already navigated a lot of the bias and all of those kind of things that they've had to deal with. They have their mentors in place. They have a lot of their community in place. So I think the challenges are less over there. It just kind of becomes a bit more mainstream in terms of your regular growing pains. That's at least been, of course, our experience with it.
That's super useful, Aditi. So, the peer learning, the inspiration piece of it, which Brinda talked about, you've experienced that as well as something that's effective, and asynchronous learning, which allows people to follow up with the same modules at a time that's convenient to them. Those are specific design elements that you saw really having positive outcomes when it comes to women being able to actually participate in capacity building sessions. Coming to you, Omar, you mentioned about the role of technology, right? And helping women-led businesses use technology to their advantage. Is this something that was a demand that you sensed? What made you pick up on that topic specifically? And were there any other intentional differences that you created in your programs for women-led businesses?
Sure. So taking a step back from technology, we made some infrastructural decisions early on. And by infrastructure, I mean very basic things like providing a safe and secure working environment where women feel comfortable spending their day working. So the National Incubation Center is actually based inside a university with its own security and its own, rules and regulations and so on and so forth. I did a walkthrough of the center just a few minutes before this call, just counting the ratio of women to men across. We have quite a large space, but approximately 40% of the people at the incubation center an hour ago were women. Along with that, we have created a sort of creche for women to be able to use for, if you've got a baby you need to bring with you, if you've got, you have breastfeeding needs, or you need to accommodate some other, requirements. We have cameras throughout the NIC, except of course for the privacy room. But the idea is to create an environment which is physically and emotionally calming and reassuring to not only the women who are coming, but to their families as well. Because, again, dealing with those cultural constraints, I don't want my daughter going and sitting in some, random place in the middle of a commercial area because, X, Y, and Z reasons. Along with that, the entire incubation center is created on an open plan. There are no hidden spaces. There are no, areas which are not covered by line of sight for cameras. So again, just providing that reassurance. And that is actually, we've gotten feedback that, the space is a very positive one for women to interact with and to engage with and to spend time at. Along with that, we recently upgraded our internet connection. And this sounds really stupid, but if you have 100 people sitting in an incubation center all trying to log into a really small bandwidth, it's a frustrating experience for everyone. So we recently, and because government entity, getting approvals to upgrade infrastructure like that is wow. I mean, it took us roughly the term of a pregnancy. But in the 9th month, our internet was upgraded, and so this is why I'm actually able to keep my camera on, and people are able to have much more interactive sessions. The third is the hybrid model. Just to echo what Aditi was saying, we have people incubated from 17 cities in Pakistan, and we have people incubated from 5 countries or 6 countries other than Pakistan. And the reason is that we run hybrid workshops, we run mostly virtual programs where people are able to attend. We make Zoom links to recordings available. We're trying to encourage, learn at your pace, but don't let your pace be so slow that the rest of the program is at week 6 and you're still in week 1. So there's a lot of follow-up from our learning team, from our monitoring team. Hey, you're falling behind. You need to keep up with your assignments. You need to keep up with your tasks. So just trying to create that infrastructural support that allows women to come forward. We also obviously we run a lot of quite large-scale hackathons in partnerships with private enterprise. So for example, with Population Services International, we have run multiple iterations of tech challenges where literally hundreds of teams have participated in helping us to solve the population crisis, because we have a net birth rate that puts us in the top 3 countries in the world, and that's just not sustainable for a country the size of Pakistan. Similarly, we have run built by her tech conferences, tech hackathons, in collaboration with the Asia Foundation and with the US Consulate. The last iteration of this saw 800 female teams. So it's only open to women. And so 800 teams participated from across Pakistan, which was mind-blowing. So this is a 4-week training program followed by a 48-hour hackathon that starts on Friday night at 6 p.m. and runs through till Sunday night at 6 p.m. And our mentors, advisors are online with these people literally 24 hours a day to make these hackathons successful. And so the outcomes of that are that the winners get they win some monetary benefits, but they also win for example, tickets to London Tech Week, or participation in regional conferences. So this is how 800 teams of techies that are women in Pakistan. Before we ran this, it was an impossibility. Our target was about 100 teams, and we would have been very happy with 100 teams. But so these are some of the things that we're doing to try and make this more and more visible, more and more accessible to women who want to follow this path.
Omar, that's really phenomenal, and congratulations to you and the team on achieving a feat like that. And I think what I'm learning from you is it's a long-term game. When you are looking at increasing the number of women working with you, you have to look at it from a holistic perspective. And I think one thing that we haven't touched upon so far, but it's so important for South Asian countries, is security.
Yes.
Right? Security for women is a concern. And being so mindful of that, and creating an infrastructure that allows for women to feel safe, to be able to participate in that manner, is one thing we haven't talked about. And I'm so glad that you brought it up. But it's a long-term game. There are multiple aspects. You have to look at it holistically. yes, virtual has given us advantages, but that's not the only way in which we can influence the increase of, women-led businesses and support them in their journeys. Coming to you, Minhaz, you too had mentioned about how in your earlier cohorts, there was no representation from women before. And then over a period of time, gradually that number increased, and then you went on to having cohorts that was specifically meant for women-led businesses. And even the way in which you designed those programs had a different element altogether. I remember you talking to us when we spoke last about motivation and inspiration to really go big. And I found that really, really inspiring. Can you share that with us?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have been mentioning about one specific experience where for Grameen Fund Accelerator that we have been running for 7 cohorts now since 2015. For the first 5 cohorts, we had 26 founders or 26 startups, with some of them having multiple founders. And none of these founders, was a woman. Think about it. And we really sat down and we really wanted to crack it. And something occurred to us at that point in time that perhaps, we got to be intentional and got to, do something specifically for women founders. At the worst, we learn even if we fail in this process, right? So we put together a whole cohort of women founders into a startup weekend kind of a model. So we brought them together. It was not many women founders at that time. It was about 30 of them who were working in, let's say, simulated teams of 3 in each. And effectively, through this process of 1 weekend long, understanding about the landscape, understanding how you can pitch to a program like an accelerator, how you can pitch in front of an investor or a jury or a set of mentors, and working closely with them over this whole perhaps 72 hours long journey. We got in the next cohort of Grameen Fund Accelerator, 4 out of 9 from this very cohort. So you can imagine, we just worked with 30 women, and from there we got 4 of them translating into success stories within a span of maybe months. So then we learn perhaps where we have been missing out on is that little bit of spark, particularly at an early stage when these women had all the right ideas. Perhaps they just needed a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of perhaps coaching on how to pitch, how to put it together, and how to communicate that. That's all. There wasn't any rocket science that we could offer them in that weekend, right? So that was one. And there was another, experience as well that I would like to share, which was not in the capital city, but, outside of the capital, when we went to, these rural places, we spoke to a lot of women before we designed an incubator program for them. And to our surprise, a lot of them said they're happy with what they have. They didn't want to grow beyond what they were doing. And that bothered us. We were kind of shocked. And then we went deep into this. And then we realized they had so much of challenges to overcome. They thought going back would just add to their perils. So they wanted to stay where they were. And that was something that we wanted to grapple with. And then, the program that we subsequently designed, have half of it dedicated to actually help change the way they think about what they can achieve in their lives. So we took them to their local success stories, to industries that have been, set up in their own division or region. And we help them meet founders who have been overcoming a lot of challenges on their journey for half of the program time. So it was a week-long program. So about 3.5 days, they have done that exploratory journey. And that help them understand that it's possible. And almost, perhaps 95% of them, when we wanted to go into a curriculum to help them grow big, was ready for it. While before we could, in the previous research work, apparently they were not, thinking of growing big. So that little bit of inspiration, awareness, and education, goes a long way. I would summarize, there are still challenges around. One thing that I'm keen to learn from maybe the fellow panelists as well is that I'm seeing as a critical challenge emerging, particularly for the startup founders that are women. A lot of them are preferring to stay solo. And as we all know, from the investor's perspective, from the perspective of growing and scaling a business, that's a challenge in most of the cases, right? So I'm having real difficulty in understanding why it is still the case and why we're not able to crack. So that's something I would like to kind of get a bit more insights and inspiration from you people. And I would echo that, one other thing that we have heard in this call that, brokering with network is a tremendous, opportunity for all men and women alike. But I think it's all the more important for women because in my humble experience, what I have seen for, particularly when they're having to play so many different roles and women being women founder is just one more on top of what they've been doing. So maybe, they're not able to be present in opportunities where they can network with investors, stakeholders, government, policy people. So I think, therefore, curation and support to broker relationships, partnerships, and network opportunities is something that I have seen, working like magic because, that's something perhaps, help them go from, let's say, place A to place B. And then, they're absolutely all right to take care of themselves. And the final thing that I would like to also add, I think, we saw a particular need for supporting with technical knowledge, particularly in the areas of finances and legal and compliance. So something that, we have been working on for the last 3 years, and a lot of it, I think, seemed like working, particularly when we took, instead of a cohort-like approach, we took more one-on-one approach because what we realized is, I don't know if it is common across South Asia, when we were doing more of a plenary conversation or a workshop with everybody, a lot of times they shied away from raising their, areas of weaknesses and perhaps asking questions that will perhaps, are looking like a bit of, dumb questions at that point in time. But when we were able to offer those same opportunities one-on-one, they were pretty open and straightforward about their weaknesses and their problems. Sometimes we had to start from very basic lessons on Excel, but it worked because, they were keen to learn. And once they were able to learn, they're very quick to get into the advanced, let's say, modeling of their finances. So I thought, it's very humbling to be able to see up close, I would echo what I said before. It's just perhaps a little bit of spark at the beginning that they all need. And afterwards, they're on their own.
Yeah, and as that's really very insightful because you're essentially talking about two things. One is that women-led businesses, women entrepreneurs need to have gone through some sort of inner journey, reflection, to spark, as you said, the intention to, really go beyond a certain distance. And I think there are organizations that are doing that do just that. And maybe that's something that we can learn from, right? When organizations have a separate sort of capacity building session on helping people go through an inner journey in order to become a stronger entrepreneur, how can we inculcate elements of that in all of our capacity building programs when we're looking at women-led businesses? And the second part that you talked about is the one-on-one approach, which is again such a simple element, but one that can really enhance the quality of capacity building that you're doing, even if it's not entirely one-to-one and it has a cohort-based, plenary-based. But if you include one-on-one sessions, how the type of capacity building, the way the entrepreneurs are able to progress can be far better. So that's a huge learning, and thank you for that. We want to open up to questions. We've been receiving so many wonderful questions, which I want to give the panel a chance to answer. But before that, Brinda, as an all-women team, how do you think that's been advantageous to you when you've been designing a program? So have there been any things that, something that we can all learn from when it comes to the composition of team while thinking through capacity building for women?
Yeah, I think with any program that we run, be it female focused or not, I think your team is absolutely critical. And as you said, yes, we do have an all-female team. That unfortunately wasn't intentional, but it's actually worked in our favor when it comes to female entrepreneurs, because I think maybe I'll share an example with you. Actually, we ran a program called Green Energy Champion, which was completely focused on clean tech. And at the start of the program, we had 100% male participation. And as the program went through, what we were able to actually identify is that, during the sessions, there would often be another woman next to the male founder, and, being actually really observant and asking, who is that person? Would they like to learn more? What's happening? We actually discovered that in most cases, I think out of the 5 startups, in 4 of the cases, the wives or partners were actually co-founders in the business, and in some cases, the CEOs of the business, and absolutely, having a leadership role. And just, going the extra mile or being observant enough to ask questions and care enough to figure out what's the dynamic here makes a big difference. And it turns out with that program, we were able to close the program with 70% female representation in an industry globally that only has 30% female representation in clean tech, which I think is phenomenal. And just speaking a little bit about, I guess, environment, some of these startups were actually from the north of Sri Lanka, and they'd never pitched in English in their life, never pitched, let alone pitch in English. And they absolutely took stage and presented. And I think that was just because of the coaching of the team and actually taking the extra time and energy to make them feel comfortable, make them, and I think we've shared already, it is very much not just about your business, but helping them develop as founders in the business and seeing them very much part of contributing to the success of this business, I think really matters. And in terms of the team, what I've observed really is having more women than male helps in, because I mean, in Sri Lanka anyway, and in the cohort that I've seen, these women don't necessarily get the support from their family or their husbands. And we've had circumstances where through the programs, families are split up and taking them through an entirely different experience, right? And I think they're just a lot more comfortable speaking to another woman about some of these problems than men. And that's not to say that, we have male facilitators, because, you're running a business, you're not always going to be talking to women all your life, right? So it's good to kind of have that mixed balance. But I think any team who's able to just really show empathy and go the extra mile to care for these startups matter. And not just during the lifespan of the program, but post-program support. It matters so much, right? Like the continued support that we give them. We do 6 months check-ins, not 6 months, sorry, we do like monthly check-ins, 3 months and then 6 months, just to make sure that they're doing well. And having that open communication goes such a long way, honestly, I think. And that's all credit really to our team, who've done an incredible job.
Thank you, Brinda. It's really incredible to see so many experiences that are resonating across the region, but also certain elements which we can learn from. And I know we're at 5 o'clock and it was supposed to end now. I request the audience to just stay on a little longer. We have a poll now, which I would hope you all can take the time to answer at the moment. So the question is, how should South Asia be collaborating to deliver better results for women-led businesses? So we're trying to take an action-oriented approach. I don't think this meeting today is the end. I think it's the beginning of a very, very useful conversation, and one that I hope will go a long way in helping women-led businesses and our ability to support women-led businesses much better. So we are going to keep this open for a minute, and then we're going to move on to some questions from the audience, which I will open up to the panelists.
So I think actually one of those questions was related to this, which was, can we share data that can actually help us to, become better as a region? I think regional data sharing, there's some data available in Pakistan. There may be some other data available in Bangladesh and India, Sri Lanka. If we can try and compile a platform for that data, it might become very powerful. It might, it would be a case of 1 + 1 being much more than 2.
Okay, and here we have our results. Okay, 67% all of the above. I guess Sucharita, Saipriya, you guys have your work cut out for you in terms of making the network work for women-led businesses. Thank you for participating in the poll. I'm going to go to some questions. I'm going to start with this one. I think Minaz, maybe you can come in, and if the others want to as well. How might be lower barriers to entry for women in business, specifically for lower income in rural areas where virtual access may be a challenge?
Right. I don't know if I have an, key to this. It's a challenge that we have been grappling. And I think one of the things that we tried is by trying to put, all of the support elements together. For example, you need to have a certification from local standard testing organization. And then perhaps you dread going there because you have got stories that maybe, not true all the time. We took women to, municipalities where they learned how to obtain the trade licenses. So they were doing business for the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but, they just dreaded going there because they didn't know how to get it. And also we brought, bank managers to our workshops. And when bank managers saw how genuinely these women are able to absorb the curriculum and how eager they are to grow, they were willing to help them, become worthy of their loans. So I think a lot of it could be done through, matchmaking between institutions and these women. So that's something I would say I have learned from my experience.
Thank you, Minaz. Anybody else want to comment on that?
So what we're actually talking about is, when we unfortunately divide society into that infamous pyramid, you're talking about the bottom of the pyramid, and then you're talking about that part of the bottom of the pyramid that has the least access to everything. They have the least access to technology. They have the least access to finances. They have the least access to learning. It's a really tough one. I mean, it's the question is not one that has an easy answer, and it's without. I mean, if you really want to solve this problem, you need to educate people. You need to have a much higher literacy rate, especially for countries like Pakistan, where women literacy is even lower than the general average literacy rate. And then if you go into the rural areas, the literacy rate drops again, I think, into single digits for this particular demographic. So, with education comes enfranchisement, being involved in what is happening. Right now, most of these people are disenfranchised. They vote where they're told to vote. they follow the norms of a patriarchal society. I don't have a simple, silver bullet kind of a solution for this. It's a very complex problem.
We actually at Wilgrow have some experience with that. So we've been working in the space of decentralized renewable energy, right? So solar powered appliances, which generate livelihood opportunities for women in rural areas. And we've taken a sort of, ecosystem approach where distributors who are actually selling all of these products, right, who have a wide reach within rural areas, we're actually showing them the business value of selling to women. So traditionally, they've been selling at places where men gather, their salespeople are all men. And we did a bit of a survey and we showed them the data saying that, hey, actually the end users and the people who are actually using these devices, a large percentage of them are women. So we trained them on how their staff, both in Tamil Nadu and in the North, can actually, number one, they should be hiring more women. And number two, which are the locations they need to be going to speak to more women customers. And they've been very excited, because it's sort of opened up a whole new world to them, but just purely by showing the business value. This is from the distribution angle. Another thing that we did was we worked with self-help groups in rural areas and understood what was really, a barrier when it comes to purchasing these products, which could generate revenue for them, right? And the simple answer, one we would all expect, is financing. They don't have a credit history, all of these other difficulties. So then we partnered with financing institutions who, because the financing institution knows Wilgrow, they know the kind of enterprises we work with, we're embedding a buyback model. That way it's assuring the financier that the person who's purchasing that product, say if it's a solar dryer and the entrepreneur is buying back the produce from the SAG member, the financier is guaranteed of their loan being repaid. So this is all very new, and it's actually something that we're looking forward to taking on and doing much more, because we're seeing really good results for small women-led enterprises in rural areas. But that's one way of doing it. I'm moving on to another question. Tanya, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. How do we make sure women aren't being included only to fill up the inclusion and diversity quota of investors, employers, and others? One second. The question got deleted while I was reading it. Yeah. How do we make sure women aren't being included only to fill up the inclusion and diversity quota of investors, employers, incubators, but are being genuinely integrated into the system? How do we monitor the real impact? Any takers on that?
That's loaded. I do want to share one thing that, you're absolutely right in the sense that this is something to be concerned about. So we do actually have, like I said, right, I mentioned that we're trying to hit this target of, 25% entrepreneurs every year. We have a lens. So for example, there is, there are obviously extra, and we have a whole evaluation system. You do get extra points if you work in social impact and if you're a women-led business, but that's our mandate. And we're still not making those numbers. So it's built into the system. I think so impact is pretty important, and monitoring impact is pretty important at Stanford Seed. So what we do, and I think which we do pretty well, is that we actually have an annual survey. So I think any long-term impact, really, it's not going to be in the course of like a 4-month program, 5-month accelerator, even a 1-year program like ours. It's really what is happening after that. And a lot of the work that happens and a lot of the progress that happens really happens after the program. So I think the way to monitor real impact is to have a system where you're actually going back and year on year, every 6 months, kind of going back and seeing how is the needle moved, right? So there's different kinds of things. So there's, of course, how many people you're taking into your program. What is the immediate impact in terms of like, were you able to open up connections for the entrepreneurs? Were they able to get access to mentors? Were they able to participate? How did they find those sessions? And those are things that you'll monitor in the short term. But how did this actually help them with their business growth? And where has this, and that's what we actually evaluate. We have an annual survey that is really taken very seriously, that everyone fills out. And in that, we're looking at all of these other things, which is, how is the business grown? How is the team grown? What is, have they raised funding after that? how have they kind of how have the enterprises themselves hit certain goals? What does the gender lens look like within the organization? And I think that happens over a period of time. So it needs a bit of patience, but I think if that's kind of built into the design of the, when in your impact measurement, I think that might help.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah,
and just
go ahead, Brinda.
Thanks. And just to add what Aditi was saying as well, I think what we found with our programs is that oftentimes these women become first-time employers as well. And what we then encourage is for them to be accountable for bringing more women into the workplace as well, right? So oftentimes you find that having gone through the program and when they're going to recruit, they do themselves actually employ primarily women, wanting to actually create more jobs for women. So see, it has a knock-on effect because these are things that they're issues or barriers that they've encountered themselves, and therefore they take it upon themselves to actually tackle some of these issues as well. Just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, so one of the things we've been measuring for the last 4 years is, well, we have 3 major KPIs that we look at. So the first one is number of jobs created by the founders. The second one is revenue generated by the startup. And the third one is investment raised by the startup. And so we, even when people have left the incubation center, we call them every quarter and we ask them for an update. And it's very challenging. People don't really respond to online research in Pakistan, or at least they're not particularly honest about the online research. But if you call the founder yourself and ask him, hey, listen, what has been your revenue last month or last quarter? They will give you a sort of, ballpark figure that is somewhat close to reality, as opposed to a completely fictional number that gets put into sometimes into online research. And the result of this is that we've just seen one of Pakistan's biggest seed rounds or pre-seed rounds for a digital bank being raised by a female co-founder or a team with a female co-founder. We've seen Pakistan's only solo female founder that has raised about $1.8 million for her startup for health tech. And so there's a lot of things that are happening, but it is, it's a very gradual process. You just need to keep focusing on it. You need to keep that, I think, gender lens in place. You need to make sure that you're being inclusive in everything that you're doing, from design of programs through to design of infrastructure. And I think over time, it's going to have a significant impact.
Okay, thank you, Omar. We're unfortunately out of time. I think we're already over time, but I do want to end with one last question to all panelists. Please be as brief and specific as possible, which is when we're talking about collaboration across the South Asian region, what is it that you or your organizations can bring to the table in terms of sharing of resources, knowledge, networks, data? Maybe Aditi, you can go first.
So we actually are working, I mentioned at the start, we are working with some collaborators from other countries, which I think is an excellent start, because some of the startups from those incubators and those networks are part of an educational program, right? Because we're actually an education program, we don't do the other kinds of things. So I think that's a great start to collaborate and not duplicate all of the same things. So the fact that they could be part of a certain kind of program in another country, but they can be part of an educational program, virtual, again in India, I think that's one big step. And I think I really feel like the other gap is and this is collaboratively as well, but because I know there are a lot of those kind of organizations in the network, but the bridge between sort of the capacity building and the financing, I think that needs to be better, because right now it's very like, you go to a capacity building program, yes, you get some networks, but then you go out and then you kind of find someone else, for financing, it's a bit disconnected. So if that happened, because, that people want to grow, they need more money for it. So it will make sense if those two things, if we collaborated on some of these programs and people were part of each other's things, and if we could, bridge the gap between capacity building and financing, I think these two things would be huge steps.
Thank you, Aditi. Brinda, sorry, just one sentence each. We're very, very over time.
Yeah, I think for us, I just think creating market access for startups from across the region, if Sri Lanka is a place that they're willing to explore, and I'd love to do a cross collaborative program as well. I think that would be quite. I could see a lot of impact coming out of that.
Awesome, thank you, Manaz.
I'm big on human connections, so peer-to-peer, opportunity to learn from each other, opening up each other's mentors, each other's stories, I think can go a long way. That's a powerful way to perhaps get started.
And Omar?
I think I'm going to beat all records, all of the above.
Okay. And one of the things Wilgrow is happy to bring to the table is on gender smart business strategies, which we've been doing a lot of work on over the last 2 years. Happy to share our learnings there. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panelists for really sharing so much of your knowledge and your insights. It's gone a long, long way. And I know this is just the beginning when it comes to collaboration across the South Asian region. And yes, Sucharita, all of those offers from the panelists, you can hold us to it. Thank you to the audience. You've been wonderful, lovely questions. Sorry we couldn't answer all, but yes, thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
For those of you still here, we'd appreciate any feedback you can give us.